What is going on? Welcome back to another episode of It's a Blast podcast. My name is Mike, also known as the EOD Happy Captain on X. If you like the content that I'm producing, please like and subscribe down below. Over the course of doing this podcast, I've had the opportunity to talk to some incredible people, and today is no exception. I sat down with Representative Rick Crawford, who represents the 1st District of Arkansas, about his time in the Army, what he does for veterans and the EOD community via the EOD caucus. Let's get started. Welcome to the It's a Blast podcast. My name is Mike. Here, I talk to members of the veteran and military community about their leadership style and how the military has affected their lives. Let's get started. What is going on? I am sitting down with Representative Rick Crawford, who represents the 1st District of Arkansas in the 119th Congress. There, he's on the House Committee on Agriculture, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, where he is the committee chairman. Sir, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Good to be with you.
No, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to talk veterans issues, to talk EOD, and where we're going on, some of these things. But I think the best place to start is your background. So you're a military brat who joined the Army. Can you talk a little bit about what led you to want to be in the Army?
Well, because I had a brother in the Navy and another brother in the Air Force, and so I thought I had to spread it around a little bit. My dad was in the Air Force for 24 years, and so I was raised in the military. But if I'd have had another brother, he probably would have joined the Marines. I don't know. But we had, all of us served in some capacity, and we grew up that it was not a question of, whether or not we were going to join the military. It's just something that we just did naturally because that's just how we were raised.
No, that makes sense. So my father was in for 32 years. My brother's still serving. My other brother was in. So I definitely understand, the call to service and the call to the nation. Why explosive ordnance disposal? There's anything you could have done. Why that?
Well, it's interesting because my dad was career Air Force, as I said, and he was an EOD guy, and I kind of knew what I was getting into. So when I was getting ready to go down to see the recruiter, he never mentioned EOD. My dad did not say, go down there and tell him you want to sign up for EOD. He's like, just go down there. He had some ideas. He threw out a few suggestions and stuff. And I came back home. He said, what'd you get? I said, EOD. And his eyes lit up and his, kind of chest puffed out a little bit, like he was proud of that. And my mom said, oh my gosh, what have you done? So it was a family thing. I knew what I was getting into, and that made me feel a little bit more comfortable because I had kind of grown up around it. And interesting thing is one of my instructors had served for my dad, in his unit when he was just a young airman. And he ended up pinning my badge on because my dad couldn't make it. So he kind of did it by proxy, and he pinned my dad's EOD badge on me when I graduated. So it was a family tradition. So there may be, multi-generation EOD techs in the community. I'm sure there are, but that's something I'm proud of.
No, I think, I get to go to every graduation every Friday here because I'm down here at NAV School EOD, so Naval School Explosive Ordnance Disposal. And I think that moment of graduation where, it culminates, right? You spent a year more of your life trying to get to this point, and you have that person come up, put that EOD badge on you. It's a huge thing. Can you talk a little bit about your time in the career field? I know you spent some time in Asia and what you accomplished. You attained the rank of sergeant. So, you did very, very well for yourself.
Well, I was in for 4 years, and, I'm stationed at Fort Indian Town Gap, Pennsylvania. Who knows where Fort Indian Town Gap, Pennsylvania is? But, back in the day, this was during the Cold War, and the way we had EOD structure at the time in the Army, where we had control centers located around the country and then detachments under those control centers. And those detachments may operate on big installations like Fort Hood, or they might operate on little installations like Fort Indian Town Gap. And I say it was little. It wasn't necessarily a small installation, but it was not Fort Hood, and it was a reserve training installation. But man, we were busy all the time. And, I was sent once to, if you remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War, I was involved in that, so was sent over to Pakistan in direct response to some action that took place. That was in 1988. Secret Service details, you name it. We did an awful lot, and I worked in airplane crash. My dad was in the Air Force 24 years and never worked in airplane crash. And I was in the Army for, I don't know, 6 months, and I responded to my first airplane crash. So you just never know what was going to happen at this little installation of Fort Indian Town Gap. But we were very, very busy all the time, and it was a life-changing experience. It really was.
Yeah, I try to explain to the students here at EOD school that, we run the gambit. I don't think the average, civilian understands that EOD is more than pulling IEDs out of the ground, which is what we did for, 20 years during the global war on terror, right? But, I was an air instructor. So we taught aircraft explosive hazards. We talked about down to aircraft. We teach soldiers and service members chemical, biological, nuclear, basic tools and methods, ground ordnance, air ordnance. So, I mean, it really does run the gambit, and you never really know what you're going to get. So you exited the Army 4 years as a sergeant, and you went to college in Arkansas. Can you talk a little bit about your days in the rodeo?
Yeah. So, like a lot of military veterans, I think that you transitioning to becoming a civilian was a little bit tough. And so, I was coming off that experience in 1988, and then immediately going into college, and was having a hard time sitting still. The first year I was in college, I had to get up, make myself go to class, because I kept wanting to go and just re-enlist. But I thought, nah, I'm gonna hang in there, because I want to get my college and all this. And so found this distraction with the rodeo team. And I had growing up, been around horses and stuff like that. So worked on some ranches. I thought I can do this. So I started rodeo, and it helped me sort of find something else, to not necessarily be just focused on kind of trying to assimilate, coming down from the military experience and trying to become a civilian. And that was sort of the bridge that helped me get there.
Yeah, and so you wound up getting injured while doing rodeo and becoming an announcer. Because I think it's important to tell this part of the story if people wonder where this is going, right? I think it's important to tell this part of the story, because this is how you get into agriculture and public service. So, can you talk a little bit what happened after you get injured doing rodeo, how that took you into radio?
It did. Well, so just by accident, I had, I got hurt. So obviously I was a better EOD tech than I was a cowboy, but I got hurt, and it was the kind of injury that it's a career ender. Yeah. And, I had, just joking around one time, was picked up a microphone at a rodeo, and, after the rodeo was over, was just sort of doing an impersonation of a rodeo announcer and all this kind of stuff. I had no idea that this was ever going to manifest into something meaningful. And I had a guy come up to me. It was another contractor that was at this rodeo, and he says, "Hey, I need you to come announce a rodeo for me next week." I said, "Nah, I don't know anything about that." He goes, "Yeah, you do. You've been around it enough. You can do it. And I just heard you playing around, so you can do it." I'm like, "Well, I could probably use the money." So I went on ahead and I did it. And I'm driving to this rodeo, and the thought occurred to me, I'm actually going to get paid regardless of who wins in whatever event. I'm getting paid. And that's when the light went on that maybe this is the area that I need to focus on for, being involved in rodeo. So I went to this rodeo. It was a great experience. And by the time I got home, this was back in the 80s, and I had the red light flashing on my answer machine. And it was another guy said, "Hey, I heard you at this rodeo. I want you to come announce a rodeo." And that's when I got the call in my mind, like, okay, I need to sell my bronc saddle. I need to quit that nonsense and start focusing on, the business end of rodeo. And it was actually pretty good to me. Opened up a lot of doors. I got into, broadcast television, ended up in radio, started my own business, radio news network, catering to agriculture, which, I had a degree in agriculture business. So it worked out really well. So, I was using my ag degree, I was using my rodeo experience, and I built a small business. And by the time I got elected to Congress, I had 53 radio stations in a 5-state area, and I operated a sports talk FM in my hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas. So it was just a lot of fun, but it was also, providing a service to ag producers and these rural communities around that 5-state area.
No, that's awesome. So you entered Congress in 2010, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the EOD caucus? For starters, what is the EOD caucus, and how did that come about in Congress?
Well, in Congress, there are so many different caucuses for so many different areas of special interest. And I probably had been in Congress about 15 minutes when the word got out that there was this EOD guy in Congress. And literally, so the Capitol Police bomb squad showed up in my office. I think literally this was the first day that I was in office. And they showed up and they had their TAC gear on and all this kind of stuff. And, they had their HDD patches on, but my staffer didn't know who they were or what was going on. So she comes into my office and she's in panic. Her eyes are just wide open. She goes, boss, there's somebody here. They need to see you. I don't know what's going on. And I walked out there and it was the, Capitol Police Bomb Squad. And they were just welcoming me to Congress, gave me a patch, it was like old home week, And so there's that camaraderie among bomb techs. The next thing you know, we're establishing this House EOD caucus. And it wasn't just the Capitol Police Bomb Squad. It was a lot of veterans. I could name a couple of names. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but some folks that were engaged early on, quickly, and thought this whole idea of an EOD caucus in the House of Representatives was a great idea. And from there, we started this caucus, and it's grown. And we do every year. We do an EOD Day on the Hill, which is an exhibition of among the DOD assets as well as civilian public safety bomb squads that come out and show us the latest and greatest, and members get some exposure to all that kind of stuff. So it's really raised the profile of the EOD community writ large, not just the DOD EOD community, but the public safety bomb squads as well, and our federal law enforcement and things like that. And that was the start of it, and it has grown, and it's a good bipartisan effort that really showcases what the EOD troops do and why we need to support them.
No, it's a fantastic event up there on the Hill. I had the opportunity to go last year and see all the branches of service up there, Homeland Security up there, the local municipalities that come up. It's an absolutely fantastic event. On the topic of, EOD and blast, I kind of want to ask this question. There's been a lot of articles in the news lately regarding repeated blast exposure and how that affects traumatic brain injury. And so it seems as though more and more news comes out. We spent 20 years during the global war on terror firing a lot of big weapon systems, right? More so than in wars past. Can you talk about any type of efforts or what's happening within Congress to kind of address some of those issues when it comes to traumatic brain injury?
Well, so I had some of my EOD caucus colleagues, and we brought in USASOC came in and gave us a brief on this, and they're kind of tip of the spear on this deal. And a lot of their concern was the repeated exposure to blast with regard to explosive breaching. But, that fits right in with what EOD troops are exposed to every day. And one of the things I like in that too is, how do we quantify that level of exposure in a way that is, I think back to my days, at Fort Indian Town Gap when we were a nuke unit and we kept our film badges anytime we went out on a nuclear response, or anytime we used our, Mark 1 Mod O X-ray machine, got the film badge on, and every month we would send those film badges in so we could keep track of cumulative exposure, so that if it ever became a problem, we would know, we would have a record of it, and we could be sort of baselining in a way, keeping track of what our physiology was, and making sure that we weren't doing any damage to ourselves with repeated exposure. It's the same thing with explosive blast exposure. The repeated exposure, it's like I've had 3 concussions. Every one gets easier. The first concussion I had, okay, no surprise, I got thrown off a horse. But next thing you know, you're getting a concussion. It's easier. Every time you suffer a concussion, the next one is easier. Your threshold becomes considerably lower for that. Same thing with blast exposure. The more you get exposed to, the more, cumulative effect it has on you. And we haven't done a really good job in tracking that, but we are now. We're working on that. In fact, we know that there's a direct correlation of TBI to suicide. We're trying to close that gap. We're trying to make sure that the resources are there so that healthcare providers, and typically it's going to be VA. Because look, veterans that are retiring from or that are leaving military service, and they need that support. And typically it's going to be a VA healthcare provider that needs to be better versed in dealing with TBI, in particular as it applies to the cumulative effects of exposure. So these are some things that we're doing everything we can to direct funding to and authorizations for the continued study of TBI and all the effects that it has on soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines.
No, it's greatly appreciated. You just touched on veteran suicide. There was a report that came out, I think, at the end of last year, talking about MOSs, so specialty jobs within the military, and suicide rates, and EOD and divers were up there pretty high. And so I kind of want to talk about something you just touched on, which is Veterans Affairs, right? People that have left military service. What is happening for those folks that see long wait times or maybe in a rural area? It's hard to get services. Can you talk about some of the things that you've done in regard to that?
Yeah, let me say this about the VA, and if there's folks that are working at the Veterans Affairs Administration, if you're not passionate about providing health care to veterans, then you need to leave the VA. It's just that simple. If it's just a job for you, you can find just a job anywhere. What we need are people who are passionately committed to the care of veterans. And why I say that is because the bureaucratic sort of mess that we find, and I deal with constituents all the time, veterans that are coming to me for help, and we engage on a daily basis trying to address the caseload that we have. Many veterans don't know to come to their member of Congress. And I'm just telling you, if you're a veteran watching this and you have a problem with wait time, go see your member of Congress, because they can expedite that and lean on the VA. Now, I didn't say that to badmouth the VA, but the reason I said it is because I think for these veterans who are leaving military service, whether they're ETSing or whether they're retiring or whatever the situation is, if they're relying on Veterans Affairs, Veterans Administration to provide them health care, I want to make sure that everybody that's in that mission is committed to that mission and not just there because it's a paycheck to them, because it really needs to be a passion. It really needs to be a full-on commitment from those folks. And so I'm asking you to just, think about it in those terms, because for these folks, these military folks that are reliant on you, the least we can do is to deliver in a way that is respectful of their service. And many times, healthcare delayed in many cases is healthcare denied. A lot of these issues can't wait. And then we end up in a scenario where it's delayed. And guess what? I have personally talked to EOD techs, my EOD brethren, who were maybe minutes away from taking their own life. And the only call they knew to make was to me. And it's that serious. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic about it, but I made a deal with a guy on the phone one time. I said, before you ever consider this again, stay off Facebook, number one. But before you ever consider this again, you call me. And he's got my cell number. And it was a difference maker. And that's what I think veterans in general, but EOD guys in particular, struggle with. And there's a variety of contributing factors to that. And we can talk about that. But I mean, the fact remains that it's in the EOD MOS, this is a real problem. And so that's why I'm concerned about it. That's why I'm passionate about it. That's why I'm imploring VA healthcare providers to really understand why we want them to be a passionate provider and compassionate as well.
No, hey, I think, Congressman, you just hit the nail on the head. I got a really good friend who took his own life a couple of years ago. There are some great resources, especially for the EOD community. We have After the Long Walk. I have personally driven to someone's house, put them in my car, and taken them to go get seen and go get help.
Mm-hmm.
It is without a doubt, it's an issue, as you talked about. What can the average soldier do, or service member, for those that are watching that aren't in the Army? What can the average service member do, to support their peers that are going through these struggles? Because a lot of them, it seems, are driven from repeated blast exposure. They're from trauma in combat, from moral injury. And so, what recommendation as a veteran do you have for those people?
I think first off, you have to understand everybody has a different ability to compartmentalize information, experiences. Not everybody has the same capacity to do that. If you're somebody that has the ability and you need to lend yourself to others so that you can help recognize that not everybody maybe has that capacity. and be that resource for them. If you don't do anything else, just listen to them. It doesn't matter if you're an EOD guy or not. The common bond here is you're a veteran. So just kind of listening to the shared experience that you have. You don't even have to say anything in many cases. A lot of it is to just sort of commiserate with your brother or sister in arms and let them know you're there for them. You don't have to have had the exact same experiences to be able to relate to that individual. So, look, just being there for people is a difference maker, I think, first and foremost.
Can you talk a little bit about, EOD is obviously, and I know I'm keeping it EOD centric because that's what I know really, really well. It's what I love so much, but it's a high stress environment. Can you kind of describe how that has prepared you for being in Congress and being on these committees?
Yeah, it's, people kind of joke with me about that. What did you used to do in the military? Oh, you were a bomb tech. Oh, well, that's perfect for Congress. The idea is to prevent things from blowing up. And so I think that it sort of has something to do with your temperament. If you are a bomb thrower, you got a different attitude, you got a different perspective. Yeah. And then, we're the guys that prevent the detonation. So it's not necessarily about being a squish or not being conservative or not being strong enough on this issue or that issue. It's about recognizing that it really doesn't help anybody if there's a detonation. So let's prevent the detonation, and then we can start examining, where we go from there. How do we prevent that from happening again, or what do we do to affect positive outcomes on the other side of this thing? But I think a lot of it just has to do with temperament.
No, it makes perfect sense. You've introduced several bills related to EOD personnel. How do you stay connected to not only the EOD career field, but to the military? What are some mechanisms that you have in place that help you stay connected to the military?
Well, the EOD caucus helps, but a lot of it is maintaining relationships. I still text frequently with some classmates of mine. And I want to tell you how long ago it was that I went to EOD school, but I went to Indian Head, so that tells you something. And so I still maintain contact with some of my classmates and then also folks that are in the industry who serve the EOD community, the National Association of Bomb Techs, a variety of ways that you can maintain that connection. And so that helps you to sort of stay involved in what's going on in the community. And this, it's a small community, relatively speaking. There's only a handful of folks in the big picture that are engaged in this. And so it makes it a little bit easier to maintain contact. Heck, I remember running into a guy that I went to school with at a ordnance contractors meeting. Oh gosh, about a year ago, he came up here and I was like, "Oh, hey man, this is my old buddy from EOD school." And it's just like, it's amazing how time just sort of stands still for a minute when you think back about when you're going through school. That also is, it's a bonding experience. When you go through something like that, it's a pretty intense 1 year or longer for some, depending on how long it takes. But you've been there and you're there now, and you know what it's like. It's probably you'll have those lifelong friendships.
Yeah, I think, I graduated school. We're coming up on 15 years this summer. So, this is the best choice I think I've ever made. I think the community that I have, surrounded myself in, the friends I've made, I've had them for life. I got people that I can pick up the phone any hour, of the day or night and have a conversation about what I'm potentially going through. Congressman, can you talk about, regarding veterans, what are you most proud of having accomplished in Congress thus far?
I think standing up the EOD caucus is probably in and of itself is maybe one of the best things that I've done, because I've had some active duty EOD personnel because that was the sort of the catalyst for some of the legislation. I sort of struggled with after 9/11. I had gotten a little long in the tooth, but I tried to go back in and they said I was too old. So okay, I can't go back in. And that's how I ended up on a political track. I wanted to make a contribution. So when I got here, it allowed me a platform to be able to advocate for the EOD community. It wasn't necessarily my intention to do that, but because of my background, it was sort of a natural thing to do. And I think that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is not only standing up that EOD caucus, but maintaining it and growing it to the extent that it has, and getting other members, and not just veterans, to take a look at what the EOD community is all about and how we need to strengthen it and advocate for it across the DoD spectrum, as well as our public safety bomb squads. And then, there's been some things that were, and you can get into the weeds on some of the bills that we've run with regard to research and development and different kinds of things that provide funding streams for important EOD tools and so on. Yeah, that's important. But just bringing the EOD community to a higher profile here in Congress is probably the most important thing we've done as a group of folks who advocate for EOD.
No, it is greatly appreciated as an EOD tech. Thank you so much. Since I have you here, I would be remiss if I did not ask, can you let on anything that might be coming for the EOD community, or bills that are potentially in the works right now to support the EOD community?
We're going to have our EOD day on the Hill. We'll probably, I typically, there's some things that I have chipped away at over the years, and will continue to chip away at. One of them is Army specific. I mean, the reality is I advocate for the EOD community in general. I mean, and it is a joint community, as you know, and I give you an example. Obviously, my dad was Air Force EOD. I was Army EOD. There was a Navy guy that I'm good friends with that he clipped a video of me on the House floor memorializing two EOD techs. One was a Navy guy, one was a Marine. And he sent this around. He said, hey, look at this. If you had any doubts about the joint service nature of the EOD community, here's an Army EOD guy, son of an Air Force EOD guy, memorializing a Navy EOD guy and a Marine EOD guy. And that is the brotherhood, the sisterhood, the camaraderie that exists amongst the community that I'm really proud to represent. But so I'm doing everything I can across the board. But there are some things I think that the Army needs to take more of notice on, and that is, number one, it's my goal to get the Army EOD community sort of aligned with or commensurate with what the Navy does. In fact, I mean, it's almost like a plug and play tactical operator. That is to say, look, the Army owns the combat mobility skills training facilities. That's jump school, air assault school. I think that's as a minimum. The EOD community would be adding value to themselves to possess those basic combat mobility skills, so that they can go in and do a rotation in special ops and then come back out into the EOD community in a rotation, maintain a lower op tempo for those EOD soldiers. But in order for us to do that, we've got to have a basic EOD branch. And I've been chipping away at that for a long time. And, back when I was in, it was just, in case of emergency, break glass. I mean, nobody really wanted to hear from EOD until something bad happened. And I think that we need to recognize that we have to take a left of boom posture. We have to recognize that these are valuable assets, and should be, we should have representation at the highest levels of command. And it's not to, I'm not denigrating, and I'm certainly not going to ask for a comment from you because you're still in there. But I'm just saying that the current construct, I think, does not do full justice to the capabilities that we could bring to the table if we had our own basic branch. So I've been chipping away at that for better than a decade. Make a little progress, progress, and then here's a study, and the study comes back and disagrees with what my assertion is or whatever. We need to keep plugging away at that, and I think we're posturing differently now. We're the global war on terror is and was the global war on terror that's not necessarily going away, but we are engaging in reposturing as it applies to great power adversaries. And so making sure that we are in a position to not just be the preeminent counter IED forces that we are, but also recognizing that we can't let those core skills atrophy in terms of the actual explosive ordnance that we deal with in weapon systems and new munitions coming online, things that we're seeing coming out of Ukraine, for example, and part of that means that I think we need to be better represented on the intelligence side. And I've look, we've got some really good, smart people in the EOD formations across DOD that could lend an awful lot as it applies to, technical intelligence analysis, exploitation, and what have you on new weapon systems that we're maybe seeing for the first time as we, gear up to engage potentially with near peer, our great power adversaries. So those are the kinds of things I think we need to be conscious of and make sure that we are. Look, I've seen the EOD community in the United States evolve from the time as a kid when I lived in England and, the IRA were constantly bombing in Northern Ireland, and the Brits were the preeminent bomb techs of that age. And then we started to see terrorism in the Middle East, and we saw the Israelis emerge as the preeminent bomb techs. And after 9/11, guess what? I mean, we ended up in that space. And I will tell you this, that the United States military doesn't take a backseat to anybody when it comes to our capabilities in EOD, and particularly in counter IED operations, and all that's associated with that. And that's been sort of the evolution, my observation of it over the last 40, 50 years.
No, I will tell you this, being down here at the schoolhouse, it's, the men and women that are coming into EOD right now are in better shape than I was when I came through school. They are smarter than I was when I came through EOD school. We are putting out an incredibly high product to the force, right? Regardless of what branch of service that is, the standard down here at EOD school has gotten harder, has not gotten easier. So we are putting out quality EOD technicians out into the joint service environment. I know we're running out of time, Congressman. I will leave you with this final question. For someone that is listening who may be considering joining the EOD community, what would you say to that person who says, man, I'm thinking about joining, but maybe EOD, maybe not? What would you say to them to sway them to our side?
Well, I mean, look, people will automatically sort of reflexively go, well, it's so dangerous. It is, but I mean, I've made this point before. It's not about danger, it's about safety. And I mean, you can control, your actions, you can be safe, all that kind of thing. But aside from that, it's the camaraderie of the community that sets it apart across the branches. There is, it's just it's a brotherhood that just never dies. I mean, it's going to be with you. My dad and I talk about this. I remember, I even during EOD school, come home for a week. I got a break between blocks and got to come home, and we're having these conversations with my mom. She's like, you guys are just completely gone, but it's just, there's something about it, that it's just, I'm sure the special ops community probably has that same type of camaraderie, but this is such a small, close-knit group of folks that, to me, that contributes to a quality of life that you probably don't get elsewhere in the military.
No, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. Sir, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down. Thank you for, obviously your service to the country, your time in EOD, but what you continue to do for the EOD community and for the veteran community at large. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you hopefully in the May timeframe.
You bet. Look forward to it. Thanks.